My name is Paulo, and if we've never met, I apologize. No, I don't. I don't regularly go here, but I consider this to be one of my many homes across the city. This was the first church that I had the privilege of serving at in Ottawa, and whenever I get the chance to come back, I jump at it. So thank you for having me this morning. So come with me to an ancient time. 1,000 years, about 1,000 years before Jesus was born. The Egyptian dynasties were at their full power, and the Middle Eastern, Babylonian, Persian empires were still forming. It was a brutal time. The small kingdoms in the Middle East were fighting for territory, and they were doing so in wars that were just bloody and protracted. And the nation of Israel, which was 13 small tribes, were trying to establish themselves in a small piece of real estate. And they had arrived as a nomadic people after 40 years in the desert under a fearless leader. And they were a force to be reckoned with. These were battle-hardened people, desert-hardened people. Make no mistake about it, the way they took over their land was by sheer force and brutality. They had wiped out whole cities and tribes in their march northeast, and so naturally, they made enemies out of the people they had displaced. At this time that we're at, they're being particularly brutal towards a group of people called the Philistines. And an escalating series of battles led to a climactic clash. Stay with me, because on this day, 1,000 years before Jesus, something extraordinary is happening. A young man by the name of David is walking onto the battlefield. He's going to face a 10-foot mammoth man, and all he's carrying is his shepherd's staff, a sling, and 5 smooth stones. Now, because this story exists so much in the zeitgeist of pop culture, it is so easy to forget how intimidating it must have been to face this 10-foot man that we know as Goliath. Goliath was covered head to toe in bronze armor. He must have looked like a demigod standing there in his gleaming armor, all 126 pounds of it. He had the biggest sword anybody had ever seen. His spear shaft was like a fence rail. The spear tip of this terrifying javelin weighed 15 pounds. Can you imagine being struck by him? It would just tear you limb from limb. The absurdity of it all is that David, walking onto the battlefield this day, has no battle experience. He's not been on the front lines. He's never faced the horrors of war. All he knows is the stories that his brothers have told him. He likes the battle stories, but he's never had to spill blood like his bigger, stronger, faster, more impressive brothers have. And the man he is facing is a legend. He's so intimidating that for 40 days, nobody has dared to step up to his challenge. All the armies of Israel are gathered. All the armies of the Philistines are gathered. And here we are, a mere youngster, an apple-cheeked, as the Bible says, apple-cheeked and peach-fuzzed-faced man-boy is walking across the battle lines to face the most fearsome warrior anybody had ever seen. How did this happen? How did we end up here? Is this the best Israel has to offer? You can't be serious. What's going on? In order to understand how we got here, you have to take a step back. Do you remember Kevin's message last week, if you were here last week? Israel had clamored for a king, and they'd got a pretty impressive guy. His name was Saul. Saul was huge. He was intimidating. When certain people were refusing to come under his leadership, he took 2 cows and cut them into pieces and sent the pieces as a threat to the people who wouldn't come under his leadership. If you watch the Godfather movies, this probably sounds familiar. As a physical specimen, Saul was impressive. Saul was a head taller than everybody in Israel. So that would make him at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. You see, on this day, with David walking onto the battlefield, something is wrong. Israel had their own mammoth man, and his name was not David. His name was Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 9. Verse 1. There was a man from the tribe of Benjamin named Kish. He was a son of Abiel, grandson of Zeror, great-grandson of Bechorath, great-great-grandson of Aphiah, a Benjaminite of stalwart character. He had a son, Saul, a most handsome man. There was none finer. He literally stood head and shoulders above the crowd. David had no fighting experience. He was not supposed to be on the field. On the other hand, Saul had an impressive resume of battles. In fact, in some cases, he single-handedly brought about victory because he was such a physical force to contend with. 1 Samuel 11, verse 9. Saul instructed the messengers, "Tell this to the folk in Jabesh Gilead. Help is on the way, expected by noon tomorrow." The messengers set straight off and delivered their message. Elated, the people of Jabesh Gilead sent word to Nahash, "Tomorrow we will give ourselves up." They're setting them up. "You can deal with us on your terms." Now, long before dawn the next day, Saul had strategically placed his army in 3 groups. At first light, they broke into the enemy camp and slaughtered Ammonites till noon. Those who left ran for their lives, scattering every which way. Saul was a tough guy. Saul was a military strategist. Saul was an impressive physical specimen. So this encounter on this day against the Philistine giant, this moment was the moment that Saul had been chosen for. This was supposed to be a battle of the giants. And as we saw in last week's message, Israel wanted a champion. They wanted an impressive man. They wanted a man that would inspire confidence and lead them onto the battlefield. But on this day, Saul is nowhere to be found. Instead, a young man without a fully grown face is round and hasn't yet become rugged is the one walking onto the field. He's not as impressive as his brothers. No. In fact, his brothers are bigger and stronger and more impressive than he is. But even David's bigger, stronger brothers are nowhere to be found. And why is he carrying a stick and a sling and 5 smooth stones? Again, I say, what's going on here? If you read this story in 1 Samuel 17, you will see that both sides, the Israelites and the Philistines, had brought their full force onto the battlefield. And this was going to be a final, decisive battle. But instead of slaughtering thousands of men, this was going to be a battle of the champions. And every day, for 40 days, the Philistine champion had been on the field, taunting the Israelites. One look at him and every single one of those Israelites gathered, lost hope. Even Israel's own Goliath, King Saul, was scared. David wasn't supposed to be fighting. He was just a shepherd, and his dad had sent him to the front lines to bring food to his brothers. We're going to read quite a few verses from 1 Samuel 17. David was up at the crack of dawn, and having arranged for someone to tend his flock, took the food and was on his way just as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the army was moving into battle formation, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines moved into position, facing each other, battle ready. David left his bundles of food in the care of a sentry, ran to the troops who were deployed, and greeted his brothers. While they were talking together, the Philistine champion, Goliath of Gath, stepped out from the front lines of the Philistines and gave his usual challenge. David heard him. The Israelites, to a man, fell back the moment they saw the giant, totally frightened. The talk among the troops was, "Have you ever seen anything like this? This man openly and defiantly challenging Israel. This man, rather, the man who kills this giant will have it made. The king will give him a huge reward, offer his daughter as a bride, and give his entire family a free ride." David was talking to the men standing around him, asked, "What's in it for the man who kills the Philistine?" and gets rid of this ugly blot on Israel's honor? Who does he think he is? Anyway, this uncircumcised Philistine taunting the armies of God alive. They told him what everybody was saying about what the king would do for the man who killed the Philistine. Eliab, his older brother, heard David fraternizing with the men and lost his temper. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you minding your own business tending that scrawny flock of sheep? I know what you're up to. You've come down here to see the sights hoping for a ringside seat at a bloody battle." "What's it with you?" David replied. "All I did was ask a question." Ignoring his brother, he turned to someone else and asked the same question and got the same answer as before. The things David was saying were picked up and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. "Master," David said, "don't give up hope. I'm ready to go and fight this Philistine." Saul answered David, "You can't go and fight this Philistine. You're too young and inexperienced, and he's been at this fighting business since before you were born." David said, "I've been a shepherd, tending sheep for my father. Whenever a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I'd go after it, knock it down, and rescue the lamb. If it turned on me, I'd grab it by the throat, wring its neck, and kill it. Lion or bear, it made no difference. I killed it. And I'll do the same to this Philistine pig who was taunting the armies of God alive. God, who delivered me from the teeth of the lion and the claws of the bear, will deliver me from this Philistine." Saul said, "Go, and God help you." Then Saul fitted David as a soldier in armor. He put his bronze helmet on his head and belted his sword over him over the armor. David tried to walk, but he could hardly budge. David told Saul, "I can't even move with all this stuff on me. I'm not used to this." And he took it all off. Then David took his shepherd's staff, selected 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the pocket of his shepherd's pack, and with his sling approached the giant. Isn't this story just incredible? The king of Israel, the one who was supposed to be the champion that would stand up to the best of the Philistines, sends a young boy out as a scapegoat. Wow. The Bible even drops a little nugget about how big Saul was and how small David really was. We saw it in verse 39, 38 and 39. Saul's armor was so huge that David could hardly walk in it. You see, when Saul sends David out, it's not just as a scapegoat. I think it is also a last-ditch attempt by an impotent leader. Everybody knew who Goliath was calling out when he would stand on the battlefield every day. Goliath was really calling out Saul. Everybody knew this. Even Saul knew it. But instead of stepping up, he sends a seemingly foolish young boy out on his behalf. "Hey, young man, with all your trash talk and bravado, you think you can do this? Well, go ahead. It's going to be terribly dangerous, and you might die. Don't say I didn't warn you. Good luck." And this is the difference. This is where the difference between man's choice and God's choice is finally revealed. With all of Saul's attributes, when it really counted, his heart is small. Saul cowers. You see, God says something very interesting when he sends Samuel to Bethlehem, to Jesse's family in Bethlehem. Jesse was David's dad. He said, "The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People look at outward appearances, but God looks at the heart." Now, when God was saying this, he was saying it in reference to the fact that the prophet Samuel had seen David's oldest brother, Eliab, and had thought, "Ooh, here's Saul 2.0. But I think God was also referencing something bigger. I think God was telling Samuel something that was yet to be revealed. And on this day, it is in full display. God looked at Saul's heart and saw that when it really, really counted, he would cower instead of facing the biggest threat that his people had ever seen, because his confidence was on the shaky ground of self-assurance. But when God looked at David's heart, he saw something else. He saw somebody that would not be intimidated by the size of the obstacle in front of him. And this is where man's choice and God's choice diverge, isn't it? There was something special that day that set David apart from every other army officer in Israel. His confidence wasn't false bravado with nothing to back it up. His confidence came from his faith in God. It was his total, blind, childlike trust in God that gave him his confidence and set him apart from everybody else that day. And this is the reason why David is God's choice. Because God doesn't need the biggest, the strongest, or the fastest person to get his work done. He doesn't need the smartest and most educated person to get his work done. He just needs somebody that will trust him to accomplish exceedingly abundantly above all we could ever ask or think. Right now, I'm at the 2.5-year mark of a church that we started called Pivot 613. When we started out, we were convinced that God was calling us to reach people that the kind of church that we were involved in at the time could never reach. And when we started out, we thought that things were going to be a roaring success. At our first service, we had 50 people, and we thought that things were only going to go up from there. But I have to be honest with you. If you come to a Pivot 613 service on Sunday afternoons at 3 at 2 Monk Street in the Glebe, what you will find is a very small congregation. Smaller than you might think. In fact, some people have questioned why we spend the time and resources that we do to keep things going, because every week is quite the production. On the outside, we look unimpressive. And while I'm being honest with you, there are times that I wonder where all the people that we thought we were going to reach went. We have our own giant in front of us, and we have to face it one way or another. We have the giant of unmet expectations. We have the giant of getting our message out and making it stick with the kinds of people that God has called us to reach. Now, I wish I could stand here 2.5 years later and tell you a victory story. I wish I could show you graphs and statistics of year-over-year growth. I wish I could walk in here with swagger, with Goliath's head, and show you the giant that we slayed and prove to you how victorious we have been. But that's not my story this morning. More often than not, I feel like the soldier is hiding behind the battle lines than I feel like David strolling onto the battlefield with absolute confidence. More often than not, I honestly feel terrified that we will not last more than 3 years. Our finances are slowly dwindling. Last week, 2 of the people that helped start Pivot 613 with me called it quits. And we rely on them for so much. More to that, we have one really big problem. I'm not a stereotypical church planter. If you meet my colleagues in the church planting world, you will find that they are just magnetic people with boundless energy and creativity. They are very succinct communicators who do not need to be tied down with their sheets of notes. And I'm not the most sociable person. Those of you that know me know this. I'm kind of prickly and slightly socially awkward. I can speak. I'm doing that today. But I know that I don't have the ease of communication that people in my position should have. And I suffer from depression and multiple physical ailments. And as a result, I don't have boundless energy. So what was God thinking when he called me? You have to ask that question. What business do I have planting a church? I don't know where you're at in your life. I don't know what you're facing. Maybe you're like Saul and you're the biggest, strongest, fastest, most formidable person around, and your colleagues are looking to you, and your family is looking to you, and your friends have put their trust in you, and everybody is looking to you for leadership. But even you are intimidated by the task that is in front of you. You know, we like to berate Saul for his failures, but in truth, if we're honest, most of us are like Saul. We only know what is in front of us. Our pastors and our prophets tell us that we should have more faith, but they are never on the battlefield, and they have no idea how huge that freaking giant is. It's easy to say, just be like David. But you don't know what it is like to walk onto the battlefield only to realize that you underestimated the magnitude of the task in front of you. Now, maybe you thought you were like David, and you walked onto the battlefield only to realize, whoa, that giant is bigger than I thought. The lesson here seems so simple, and it is, but the fact that it is a simple lesson doesn't mean that it is an easy one to apply. David is on the battlefield because of his blind faith in God. Now, on his own, I believe that David's heart would have surely given up as it did with every other Israelite soldier. He stood and faced Goliath on that day, not because of everything that he had, but because of who he had his faith in, because of God. Make no mistake about it, when David became king, because David became king after Saul, he was not a perfect leader. In fact, sometimes he was a bad leader. He made tons of mistakes, probably as many or even more than Saul. But on this day, on this one day, facing Goliath, his faith carries him. And maybe in the end, that's all we need. Maybe that's all God wants from us. We may not be towering pillars of faith, but maybe we just need enough faith to face our giants one more day. Our mistakes may outweigh our achievements, but maybe all we need is enough faith to face our giants one more time. My job is not to come out here and to ask you to have more faith without acknowledging the realities of life. It is so easy to talk in abstracts until you have to apply what we believe to real life. My job today is to ask you to consider leaning in towards God one more time. Faith is our handle on the things we cannot see. Now, our giants are not going to go away. They will come out and belittle us and curse us every single day until we face them. But the good thing is that we do not have to face them on our own because we've got God on our side. And maybe, just maybe, one day, it will be you strolling out onto the battlefield. You will be carrying tools that don't look like they'll get the job done right. And everybody will think that it is a horrible idea, but this time you'll be doing it not because you are strong, but because the one who is in you is stronger than any circumstance you might be facing. And because the more you lean into God, the more you realize that God's choice is not man's choice. God chooses you. Now, the path that he will take you on will be audacious. It'll be surprising. It'll even be terrifying at times. But if you just hold on, the giant will come crashing down.